Somewhere along the Mississippi River, the largest pyramid ever built north of Mexico stood at the center of a thriving city of thousands. And then, almost overnight, that city fell silent. No war chronicled in stone, no natural disaster that left obvious scars on the land. Just empty plazas, unfinished mounds, and a silence that has puzzled archaeologists for more than a century. This is the story of Cahokia and of the great Maya cities far to the south, civilizations that built pyramids larger than anything in Egypt at the time, only to abandon them within the span of a single generation. Rising from the Mississippi River floodplain around the year 1050, Cahokia held towering earthen pyramids, wide ceremonial plazas, and a population organized under rulers whose names have long since disappeared from memory. At its peak, more people lived here than in London during the same era. Its central structure, now known as Monk's Mound, remains the largest earthen pyramid ever built north of Mexico, covering more ground than the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Thousands of workers moved millions of cubic feet of soil basket by basket to build a city that should have lasted for generations. Instead, within the span of only a few decades, it was gone. By the time European explorers eventually reached the region centuries later, the mounds stood empty, overgrown, and mysterious. A monument to a civilization that had disappeared without leaving behind a clear explanation. And the strangest part is not that Cahokia was abandoned. Cities rise and fall throughout history. The strange part is how fast it happened, and how little warning the archaeological record shows before it did. Cahokia was not alone. Further south, in the jungles of what is now Guatemala and Mexico, the great Maya cities faced a strikingly similar fate. Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, cities filled with towering stone pyramids, elaborate palaces, and populations that rivaled the largest cities in Europe at the time. These were not primitive settlements. They had advanced astronomy, complex writing systems, and engineering capable of building pyramids that have survived over 1,000 years of jungle growth. Yet within a relatively short period, historians now often describe as the classic Maya collapse. City after city was abandoned. Construction stopped mid-project. Monuments were left unfinished. Entire population centers that had thrived for generations emptied out, and the jungle slowly swallowed what remained. For decades, the story taught in classrooms was simple. These civilizations just faded away, perhaps through some vague combination of war and decline. But the more researchers dig into the evidence, both literally and figuratively, the less that simple explanation seems to hold up. A slow fade does not explain unfinished carvings left mid-strike, tools abandoned beside them, pottery left exactly where it was last used. Why would a civilization capable of building monuments on this scale simply give up and disappear within a matter of years, not centuries? And why does the timeline in more than one location line up with events far larger than any single city or kingdom? Something happened. Something significant enough to empty out some of the most advanced cities in the ancient world almost overnight. And the closer historians look, the more it seems like the answer may not be a single cause at all, but a chain of events that push these societies past the point of no return. Before we go further, if you find stories like this fascinating, ancient civilizations that built on a massive scale only to vanish under mysterious circumstances, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps this channel keep researching and telling these stories. There is a pattern that keeps showing up across these ancient collapses, and it starts with something most people would never expect to bring down a civilization this size: water, or more specifically, the lack of it. Tree ring records, lake sediment cores, and cave formations across Mesoamerica all point to the same unsettling detail. During the exact window of time when many Maya cities were abandoned, the region experienced a series of severe, prolonged droughts, some of the worst in over 1,000 years. For a civilization whose entire agricultural system depended on predictable rainfall to feed massive urban populations, a shift like this would not have been a minor inconvenience. It would have been catastrophic. Crops failed, reservoirs ran dry, and cities built to support tens of thousands of people suddenly could not feed the population living inside them. But drought alone does not explain everything. Because at Cahokia, far to the north, researchers have found evidence pointing not just to environmental stress but to a breakdown of the social order itself. Excavations have revealed the construction of defensive stockades built directly through parts of the city, walls that were never part of the original design, suggesting a period of fear, conflict, or internal unrest in the final years before the city was abandoned. Something had shifted from cooperation to survival, and once that shift happens in a society this large, it rarely stays contained. What we are looking at may not be a single dramatic event, a single battle, a single storm, but a cascade. Environmental stress weakening the foundation, political and social pressure cracking what was left. And once enough cracks appear in a system that size, the entire structure can come down far faster than anyone would expect. The question is not simply what caused the abandonment of these cities. The question is why, once the collapse began, did it happen almost overnight? And why did so many people across such a vast region reach the same breaking point at nearly the same time? To understand how a city this size could unravel almost overnight, you have to understand exactly how fragile these massive societies actually were beneath the surface. Cahokia was not simply a collection of mounds and plazas. It was an intricate system, dependent on farming enough surplus food to support thousands of people who were not farmers themselves. Builders, priests, artisans, and rulers all relied on a small margin of extra grain produced by the surrounding farmland. That margin was the entire foundation the city stood on. And when climate researchers examined the tree ring and flood records from the Mississippi River Valley during Cahokia's final decades, they found repeated and unpredictable flooding events, followed by periods of drought, striking the region again and again. For a population this dependent on a stable food supply, that kind of climate whiplash would have hit the entire system at its weakest point, all at once. Now picture what happens next. Food becomes scarce. Trust in leadership begins to erode, especially in a society where rulers often claimed authority tied directly to their ability to ensure good harvests and favorable conditions. If the rains fail and the rulers cannot explain why or cannot fix it, the entire foundation of their authority starts to crack. Archaeologists studying Cahokia's final years have found evidence of increased violence, including skeletal remains showing signs of conflict, alongside those defensive walls built hastily through the heart of the city. This was not a peaceful, gradual migration. This looks like a society under extreme stress, trying to protect itself from something, possibly from each other. The same pattern echoes through the Maya collapse, but on an even larger scale. Because unlike Cahokia, which was largely a single major city, the Maya world was a network of competing city-states, all reliant on similar agricultural systems, all vulnerable to the same climate patterns. When the droughts hit, they did not hit one city. They hit the entire region simultaneously. And in a world where cities were already competing for resources, trade routes, and political dominance, A shared environmental crisis did not bring these city-states together. In many cases, the evidence suggests it tore them apart even further. Inscriptions from the final years of several Maya cities reveal a noticeable shift in tone. References to warfare increase. Monuments celebrating military victories become more frequent. Right around the same time, construction on temples and pyramids slows down or stops entirely. Some cities show signs of destroyed monuments, deliberately defaced, likely by rival factions, erasing the legacy of fallen dynasties. Combine failing crops, a growing population that had already stretched available farmland to its limits, and multiple competing kingdoms all fighting over dwindling resources, and you get a chain reaction with no easy way to stop it. One city falls, and the trade networks connecting it to its neighbors falter. Neighboring cities lose access to goods, alliances, or protection, and they become vulnerable too. It is less like a single tower collapsing, and more like dominoes falling one after another, each one hastening the fall of the next. Before we continue, if stories about lost civilizations and the forces that brought them down keep you hooked the way they hook me, hit that subscribe button. It really does make a difference in helping this channel keep digging into forgotten history like this. But even this explanation, drought, war, political collapse, still leaves an unsettling question hanging in the air. Why didn't these societies adapt? These were not unsophisticated people. Maya astronomers tracked celestial cycles with remarkable precision. Cahokia's builders coordinated the labor of thousands to move Earth on a scale unmatched anywhere else in North America. These were engineers, planners, and organizers capable of extraordinary things, so why? When the crisis came, did the response so often seem to be collapse rather than adaptation? Some researchers argue that the very success of these civilizations became their greatest weakness. Populations had grown so large and cities had become so specialized that there was very little flexibility left in the system. A smaller, more scattered population might have simply moved when the rains failed, spreading out and adapting the way earlier, less centralized societies had done for thousands of years. But a city built for tens of thousands of people, with an economy and social structure built entirely around that scale, had nowhere to go and no way to quickly shrink without the whole system breaking down around it. In other words, the very achievement that made these civilizations so remarkable, their ability to build massive, complex, organized societies, may have also been exactly what made their downfall so sudden and so complete once the environment turned against them. And that raises an even bigger question, one that reaches far beyond the ruins of Cahokia and the jungles of the Maya lowlands. If some of the most advanced, most organized civilizations in the ancient Americas could reach a breaking point this fast when their environment shifted, what does that say about how fragile even the most impressive human achievements can be? Because the physical evidence left behind, abandoned pyramids, unfinished monuments, empty plazas that once held thousands of people, all points to the same unsettling truth. These were not slow, graceful endings. They were sudden, and once you start looking closely at exactly how sudden, at the objects left behind mid-task, the unfinished carvings, the tools set down and never picked back up, the story becomes even harder to look away from. Here is what makes the timeline so unsettling. Archaeological layers at several major Maya sites show something almost eerie. Everyday objects, pottery, tools, ceremonial items found left in place as if people intended to return. Not packed up, not moved, simply left behind. At some sites, unfinished stone carvings sit exactly where the sculptor stopped working, the tools nearby, the monument never completed. This is not the pattern you would expect from a slow, generations-long decline. It is the pattern of something that forced people to leave quickly, and in many cases, forced them to leave for good. At Cahokia, the evidence tells a similarly abrupt story. After centuries of continuous construction, expansion, and ceremonial activity, building activity at the site essentially stops. Population estimates that once reached into the tens of thousands dropped dramatically within a matter of decades. By the time later Native American nations in the region encountered the site, Cahokia was already an ancient ruin to them too, a mystery even to the people living nearest to it. Whatever knowledge explained exactly why the city emptied out had already been lost to time, long before any written record could preserve it. This is where the story gets even more compelling, because Cahokia and the Maya lowlands are not isolated cases. Around the world, researchers have documented other advanced societies that experienced similarly abrupt collapses during periods of major climate disruption. The pattern keeps repeating. Complex, highly organized civilizations reach a peak of population and achievement, and then, when the environment shifts even slightly beyond what their systems were built to handle, the decline is not gradual. It is fast and often permanent. It suggests something important about how fragile even our greatest achievements can be, no matter how advanced the engineering, no matter how sophisticated the astronomy, no matter how massive the monuments left behind. So, what actually finished the job? Most researchers today lean toward what is often called a multi-causal collapse, not one single event, but several pressures converging at once. Prolonged drought, weakening the food supply. Overextended agricultural systems that had already pushed local land to its limits. Political rivalries and warfare intensifying as resources shrank. And a rigid, highly specialized social structure that left very little room to adapt once the crisis hit. None of these forces alone would necessarily have been enough to empty out cities this size in the span of a single generation. But together, they created a downward spiral that fed on itself, each failure making the next one more likely, until the system that had taken centuries to build came apart almost overnight. What is perhaps the most striking part of this story is not that these civilizations collapsed. Every civilization eventually changes, and many face crisis at some point in their history. What is striking is how completely the knowledge of what happened was lost. The people who built Monk's Mound at Cahokia left behind no written language explaining their reasoning. The Maya did leave writing, but their surviving inscriptions focus on rulers, gods, and important political events, not detailed explanations of famine or societal breakdown written for future generations to understand. So, we are left piecing together the story from tree rings, sediment cores, abandoned tools, and the silent, empty footprint of pyramids that once stood at the center of some of the largest cities in the ancient world. Today, when you stand at the base of Monk's Mound in Illinois or walk through the ruins of Tikal rising out of the Guatemalan jungle, it is almost impossible to imagine just how alive these places once were. Thousands of voices, ceremonies, markets, and daily life, all happening in the shadow of pyramids that took generations to build. And then, in what amounts to a blink of an eye on the scale of human history, all of it stopped. Maybe the most important lesson hidden in these ruins is not really about the past at all. It is about how quickly even the most advanced, most organized human societies can reach a breaking point when the environment they depend on shifts beneath them. These were not primitive people caught off guard by simple bad luck. These were skilled engineers, astronomers, and organizers who built structures that have survived for over 1,000 years. And even they could not outrun the combination of a changing climate and a system stretched too thin to bend. So, the next time you see a photograph of an ancient pyramid standing alone in the jungle or rising quietly out of the American plains, remember that it was not always silent. It was once the center of an entire world filled with people who believed their way of life would last forever. And almost overnight, that entire world went quiet. If this story made you see these ancient sites differently, there is a lot more forgotten history like this waiting to be uncovered. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what we explore next.